Welcome to CTL's Education Professional Development Series. My name is Stephanie Shea, Marketing Manager here at CTL, and I'm joined today by Mike Mahaney, VP and Chief Marketing Officer, as well as Anna Roach, Sales Partner and Operations Support. For those of you who are not familiar with CTL, we are headquartered in Portland, Oregon, and have been providing innovative IT solutions to education and government customers for over 26 years. Some of our most popular products include our brands of ruggedized CTL and to-go PC laptops, convertibles, 2-in-1s, and tablets designed specifically for K-12 education. Over the last 2.5 years, we've worked with Google to introduce a line of CTL Chromebooks that have been recommended by PC Magazine as the best choice for Chromebooks in education. As part of our commitment to education, CTL is offering professional development webinars for our education customers. These webinars will include a variety of topics relevant to K-12 ed tech, but will have a big focus on Google Apps for education and Chromebooks in the classroom. Today's webinar is One-to-One Chromebook Implementation, Tips and Tricks from a Teacher, presented by Dani Kennis, Technology Coach and Google Certified Educator. She's also a special education and social studies teacher. However, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we run out of time, you will be contacted by your sales representative to make sure all your questions are answered. Before we begin, I have a couple quick polls. We're curious to find out from people there, how familiar are you with Chromebooks? Would it be, no experience, some, a lot? Maybe we have some experts out there. So we'll give people just a moment to finish the survey. Looks like a lot of people weighing in. I'll give a couple more minutes or seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share the results. It looks like pretty split. 17% no experience, 33% some, 33% a lot, and 17% very experienced. Now my second quick poll for you all is, what is your role within your organization? We're curious out there who are teachers, maybe administrators, IT administrators. Looks like almost everyone's voted. Give people a couple more seconds. Okay, great. We've got mostly 48% IT administrator, interesting, 17% teacher, 9% administrator, and 30% other roles. Okay, excellent. I would now like to introduce Dani Kennis, technology coach and Google certified educator, as well as a social studies teacher and special education teacher. Dani has had the experience of implementing a one-to-one Chromebook deployment in her classroom and has some valuable experience, tips, and tricks to share. We're going to do a quick transition here so that you all can hear Dani and see her presentation. Are you there, Dani?
Yes, hi.
Hello. We can hear you loud and clear. I'm going to get your presentation up, and welcome. Thank you for presenting today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be doing this.
Oh, good, good. Let me get back to your first slide. Are you with me on the slides, Dani?
Yes, I am with you.
Okay, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to listen to this and watch this today. I am Dani Kennis. I'm a special ed social studies teacher and a technology coach in suburban New York State. The best way to reach me is on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @KennisDani, or you can email me at danikennis25@gmail.com, and my blog is at danikennis.com. So multiple ways you can reach out to me. I would love to connect with you guys, so please follow me on Twitter. Tweet at me. You can tweet at me throughout the presentation. I've got my phone here, so I'll kind of be taking a look at it. So today I'm going to be talking about one-to-one Chromebook implementation and going over a few tips and tricks from me. All right, next slide, please. So I teach in suburban New York, and I'm about 40 minutes away from New York City. I teach high school freshmen and sophomores, and I am also a tech coach. So a lot of times my weekends will be spent attending and presenting at various educational technology conferences on many different topics that all center on integrating educational technology into the classroom. Just to give you guys an idea, the population of my students includes students with learning, emotional, and behavioral disabilities, and that also includes students that are on the autism spectrum. My students are sometimes a little bit more difficult to motivate than your average student and a little bit more difficult to engage, but since going one-to-one, I've seen a really huge shift and change in all of that, which I will get into shortly. So my school is a BYOD school, so kids can bring their own devices. And last year we did a lot with smartphones, and almost every student had a phone in school. They also used desktop computers, and last year was kind of a year of me begging my principal to allow me to eventually use Chromebooks and to get a Chromebook cart. So that link that you see below, my one-to-one Chromebook journey, that kind of chronicles everything that I went through at the beginning of the year when I finally did get that Chromebook cart. So that was a bunch of blog posts that I wrote that the company Imagine Easy actually published into an ebook. So you can kind of click that to read my day-to-day Chromebook experience, or it's kind of like a diary, basically. All right, next slide, please. Just to give everyone some idea of what my classroom looks like, kind of what it feels like a little bit, we created a class hashtag, and that is hashtag KenFamSouth. The kids created that. It gives them a sense of ownership, and it really helped to kind of build that sense of community and to foster a positive climate and culture in my classroom. So what you're looking at is a picture of, again, my blended class. So we combine high-tech and low-tech strategies and lessons in my class. So we'll focus today on the high-tech, so on the use of Chromebooks in the classroom. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm a huge proponent of leading with your why, starting by explaining why you do what you do. And actually that idea belongs to a man named Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called Start With Why, and who also presented an amazing TED Talk. So definitely check that out if you haven't. But before jumping into tips and tricks, it's really important to understand why Chromebook use is important. So I think that it's most important to focus on your purpose and what you want the learning outcomes to be. The three biggest things for me are collaboration, communication, and creation. So everything that I talk about will kind of lead back to that today. The biggest draw in Chromebooks for me is Google integration and the fact that it's cloud-based. It's a huge advantage of using a Chromebook because it makes everything so easy. The fact that it integrates directly into the Google ecosystem, which in my district is something that my students are familiar with from middle school moving forward. And I'm sure, as time goes on, they'll start to use Google and Google Drive a lot more in the younger grades. So that's the biggest draw of Chromebooks for me. When you log into a Chromebook, as a lot of you guys know, because a lot of you have experience with Chromebooks, you're required to log in with your Google email and password, and that automatically allows you to access your Google Drive. So again, another really big advantage for one-to-one programs, especially where students are able to bring devices home. That's not the case in my situation, but I think that that's a huge draw for students that are able to bring those devices back and forth, being able to log on directly and having direct access to that. The other points why I think Chromebooks are really important are because it really fosters that collaborative and creative environment, and it really focuses on lessons being very student-driven and personalizing the learning for your students depending on how you use the Chromebooks. As I said before, I think that it increases engagement. It is definitely cost-effective, and it's really simple to use. I think that there's not a huge learning curve in using a Chromebook, and my students, a lot of them had never used them before they used them in my class, and they caught on relatively easily, which is nice. All right, next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit about the how, or the why, I'm sorry. I wanted to focus on the how of using Chromebooks before we kind of jump into examples. So once you've gone one-to-one and you have those devices, it's really important to remember that you don't have to use the devices all the time. Every assignment needs a purpose and an intended outcome, and for some situations, old school pen and paper are just better. So the model that, or what we're looking at here is something called SAMR, and it's a framework for integrating and using educational technology. It's a non-evaluative reflection tool that can be seen as kind of a model or a guide on really how to shift your classroom using technology. So there are a ton of different analogies to help people understand what SAMR actually is, but this one is my favorite because I love coffee, and I also think that this is the most obvious and clear. So if we kind of think of SAMR as like a Starbucks, there are many different kinds of coffee that we can get. So starting at the beginning, we've got our regular old cup of coffee, which is our S for substitution, and technology is acting as a direct tool substitute with no functional change. So an example would be students kind of using Google Forms, let's say, instead of paper to take a test or a quiz. Our A is for augmentation, where the tech is the tech is acting as a direct tool substitute with functional improvement. So that's like a latte, so a little bit fancier. That would be sharing file folders in Google Drive or choosing an app to take notes in. Then we've got our M, modification, where tech is allowing for significant task redesign. So again, we're kind of moving up and getting a little bit fancier with our caramel macchiato. So we've gotten our feet wet and we're going to jump in. So our M could be creating projects with iMovie. And then the last step is redefinition, and that's technology allowing for the creation of things that couldn't previously be conceived or done. And that's like our pumpkin spice, right? So something totally new and innovative. That could be collaborating on mind maps or using something like WeVideo to produce content. Next slide, please. So for me, the biggest thing about going one-to-one was realizing that it really was a mindset shift and understanding that I had to embrace the idea that I wasn't going to be the sage on the stage anymore, that it was going to be, my classroom was going to be a student-centered learning environment that really focused on that personalized and self-paced learning that I think Chromebooks really facilitate and allow. It really does allow for a focus on student voice and student choice, and I've seen such a huge increase in the level of empowerment and ownership that my students have now that they're able to use these devices. Next slide, please. So first and foremost is organizing the physical space of your classroom, and I did not realize how important this was when I first began, but you are looking at a tweet on the left-hand side on the day that the Chromebook cart magically showed up in my room. And so I knew I needed to find a space that would be kind of out of the way from everything else for easy access for my students. So my suggestion is to place the cart somewhere where the students aren't kind of weaving in and out of rows, and in a place that won't interrupt the physical flow or space of the room. And to help with this, what I did was I used the label maker, or to help with organization, I'm sorry, I used the label maker to assign each Chromebook a number that I put on the Chromebook and also on the cart in the space that correlates with that number. I then created a Google form, that's what you're looking at on the right side, for students to fill out to record their numbers. I laminated that form, and I keep a copy of that right on top of the Chromebook cart just in case the kids forget. This also helps with holding students accountable because there are sometimes issues with students not charging their Chromebooks or putting them away correctly. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the biggest mistakes I initially made at the beginning of the year was not properly scaffolding how to use Chromebooks. I kind of assumed that because most of my students grew up with devices, they knew all there was to know about using a computer, so I sort of neglected to set this really important foundation. I jumped into assigning a project and became really frustrated when my students became confused and things were taking longer, and then I realized the importance of really explicitly teaching the ins and outs of a Chromebook. So on the right-hand side, there are a few things that I think are key to going over with your students. They need to be taught how to sign in, how to customize, and that's a big piece, the customization of their icon, of their background, because that really allows them to personalize their one-to-one experience and give them that sense of ownership over their device. My students also had a lot of trouble, and they actually still do, knowing what the meaning of the keyboard buttons are and knowing the shortcuts and the icons. And it might not seem that important, but knowing those things really does save time because it saves you clicks. And in the end of a 45-minute period, that can be something that's really big and really important. So teaching them about the keyboard and the touchpad are key. Those links will lead you to more information. So when this presentation is shared, I can go ahead and click that. And then bookmarks is also something that's really huge. I've taught my students to bookmark Google Drive, Google Classroom, any site that they visit frequently. Again, anything to kind of save a little bit of time and a few clicks. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other thing that I think is important, first of all, is teaching students how to pin a tab and how to use tabs in and of itself. That was a really big deal for my kids. Explaining what the Omnibox is, explaining to them how to access Google Apps and Google Drive, and even explaining the difference between what all those things do, what the difference is between slides and docs and sheets and forms. My students needed a reminder of that. And then kind of just giving them time to play. I think for me that is the most important thing that you can do, is give them time to kind of make those mistakes and mess around with it a little bit, because there could potentially be a really big learning curve. So they need that time to kind of get comfortable, ask questions, and that will eventually save you a lot of time at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so my favorite part is getting creative with the Chromebook. So now that you've kind of got the basics down, what can you actually do with the Chromebook? So there's a list here of a bunch of different things you can do. I won't go through all these things, but some of my favorites are student blogging, making video projects, flip instruction, Google Communities, Google Hangouts, using it for Genius Hour, coding. And so these are all things that I've seen done really, really well in a lot of schools. There are, if you go to the next slide, please, there are a few examples that I've included of things that students have created. And they take so much pride and so much ownership in these things, and it's really amazing to see. So what we're looking at is an example of a Padlet, and that's a website. If you click, when you get the presentation, when you click on it, this will take you to the website. Padlet is basically an online bulletin board. So this is just a different way of displaying information rather than kind of taking notes or writing it down. So I'll let my students take notes on this from time to time. Next slide, please. One of my favorite projects that we actually just finished up in class is students had to create a playlist for a historical figure, and some of the things they came up with were so amazing. I love this picture that one of my students created of Trotsky holding an iPod. They had a lot of fun with that, and so they really got creative in the way that they chose to display their information. Some of the kids actually used their phones. You're looking at a picture on the right side of students using their phones to kind of work on parts of this and other projects. Next slide, please. And then we've got three other examples here. So on the top, you're looking at a wanted poster that students made for Julius Caesar. So that was a template that they used, and a lot of them kind of chose to use a template and also make a video along with that, which was really cool. And then at the bottom, you're looking at Prezi, which is kind of an interactive presentation tool, another tool that the kids really, really love. And on the right side is one of my favorite things that we do in class. I don't know that it's the kids' favorites, but it's mine. So using Google Forms, every week I will give a quiz to my students, and it's called a TBT quiz for Throwback Thursday. Every Thursday, they take this quiz that reviews information from a past unit. So we've kind of built this into the culture of our classroom at this point. When students come in every Thursday, they grab a Chromebook, they log onto Classroom, and they click the link that takes them to the quiz. And it's weirdly something that they look forward to. I think they really enjoy using their devices to take the quiz rather than just regular old pen and paper. And that's nothing fancy, and it's something that they could easily do on pen and paper, but it just kind of adds a different element to the classroom, the fact that they are doing the quiz on using their Chromebook, rather. Next slide, please. One of my favorite capabilities of Chromebooks are extensions. Extensions are, for those of you that don't know, features that give additional functionality in the Chrome browser. They're really great because a lot of them are free. So if you have students add them to their browser, it really offers a more personalized learning experience. So on the left side, you have some of my favorite examples for extensions. Starting with Save to Google Drive. This is an extension that allows you to save content directly from a website, or you can capture a picture or information and save it right to Google Drive from the website. Next, we have something called Readability, and this is awesome because it kind of gets rid of all that clutter that you see on a website when you're trying to read text. So for example, if I have students read a news article, this brings you to a new page where the article is formatted so that there are no ads, no pictures, and it really does make the reading of the article a lot more simpler and basic in terms of the physical layout. Then we've got One Tab. This is actually my all-time favorite. If you're like me and you browse with a billion tabs open at any given time, this is an awesome extension. So this allows you to funnel all of your tabs into one tab, one list, that turns all of those things, all those tabs, into hyperlinks. Then we have Grammarly, which helps with spell and grammar check, and it activates on most websites in which you have to type something. Then we've got Ad Block Plus, which is just an ad blocker that prevents those annoying ads and pop-ups on pages. And finally is one of my favorite extensions for my special ed students, which is Select and Speak. So you highlight text on any given page, and the extension is able to read it aloud for you, which I think is awesome for those kids that have or that need those accommodations. The reverse of that extension also exists, where you're able to speak into the microphone and it can type out your text for you. So there's a lot of awesome add-ons actually in Google Docs that give you a lot of extra functionality like this as well. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to challenges. I don't like to be negative about things, but there were a few things that that I see as being a little bit difficult to navigate around at first in terms of Chromebooks. So the first and the biggest is printing. It is easiest to print from a Chromebook with a cloud-ready printer. It's possible with others, but excuse me. The big benefit is that having those difficulties printing from a Chromebook kind of forces you to go paperless, and with that Google Classroom integration, it's really not that big of a deal, but that was definitely a challenge. Another challenge was time management, and again, just allowing time for students to learn and play and collaborate, and it does take a little bit of adjustment at first to figure out how much time they actually need to complete a project or collaborate or communicate with one another. Third is the idea that using the Chromebooks, you have to keep in mind, what is my goal? You always have to lead with a purpose in mind, and remember that it's not about the technology, it's really about the learning. Then we've got professional development, and I think this is one of the biggest ones, is before rolling out a one-to-one plan, there's got to be some training on letting teachers know what's expected of them, what the policy is going to be, allowing teachers the same things as students in that you let them make those mistakes and fail forward and learn how to use the devices before you can let the students use the devices. Then bandwidth. This is a pretty big one. I don't have any direct I guess, say in the bandwidth. I am on my school's technology, or my district's technology committee, but you've got to have the infrastructure to support the devices, and you have to have that working properly before rolling out a one-to-one program. And then lastly is the idea that really change is scary, and not everyone is going to embrace it, and you have to realize that there will be a learning curve, and there might be some resistance to embracing a one-to-one program initially. Next slide, please. So on this next slide, there are just a few additional resources, and this, a few of these things link back to various resources. So we've got some blog posts on here, a Symbaloo, which is a collection of other resources, but if you're looking to learn more, you can always reach out to me, of course, or you can check these resources. Next slide, please. All right, so that's it. I would love to hear your questions. I would love to connect with anyone needing any help at all. Please feel free to reach me on Twitter. That's probably the best way to reach me. You can email me or check my blog.
Okay, hi, Dani, hi, this is Anna. We've got a couple of questions here. Our first question today is from David, and David's question is, we have a shared tank where several classes can book and use a set of 20 Chromebooks between 50 odd students. What would be the best way to allocate them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think he mentioned that he did have a schedule. I would say that's definitely the best way to do it. You have to really plan ahead in that situation if you know that you're sharing the Chromebooks. And again, you don't have to use those Chromebooks every day, so you have to kind of find a way to mix in those high-tech and low-tech strategies. But a schedule is definitely the best way to go about that and planning ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. We also have another question here from Marcy. Marcy would like to know, what extensions do you recommend for video editing?
Video editing. I actually don't do a whole lot of that, but for capturing pictures, which I know is not our question, but for capturing pictures, I really like Snagit. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure about video editing. But Marcy, if you're listening, please tweet at me, and I will reach out to some people that I know and find an answer for you.
Okay, great. I think that is all that we have for questions today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Dani, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of CTL and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.